All right, thank you guys. We've got an awesome audience here. So let's jump into it. The empathy conundrum. That's like a crossword puzzle answer.
Yeah.
Let's just start off. What is empathy for a big company? What are we talking about?
So for me, empathy means that you have to walk in people's shoes, right? Whether it's your customer, your partner, your employee, you have to walk in their shoes, and you have to understand them, and you have to care. That's what it means at a human level.
Yeah, I mean, I think just even the word empathy, if you think actually in psychiatry, the definition of a psychopath is somebody without empathy. So it's obviously important for any individual or any company or any culture actually.
Well, every CEO is a psychopath, right?
I didn't say that, you said that. So, I think empathy is really actually about generosity. It's actually thinking about other people and acting upon it. And that's an easy thing to say in a company and in a corporation, but those that actually practice it and live it and cultivate it, I think are actually the most successful companies that are around, those that's actually part of their natural muscle.
So speaking of acting on it, like Karen, how does a giant company like yours actually act on this? How do you show the customer that you care about it, that you care? Yeah.
Well, actually,
especially if it's B2B.
That's exactly right, Steve. So people would say, if you're in the consumer business, I get it. You have to relate and empathize and care to Mick's point. But in the business space, there's actually a different emotion that you have to show empathy towards. So believe it or not, a business buyer is actually more emotional and irrational about their purchase decision than a consumer. So if I'm a consumer and I like shoes, I buy a pair of shoes online, what's the worst thing that can happen? I don't like them, they don't fit, I send them back. Worst thing is I pay shipping, that's it.
Yeah.
A business buyer, if I make the wrong decision, I can lose my reputation, I can lose my job, or I can bring down my whole company. So the emotion that a business buyer feels is fear, it's risk. And so if you can empathize towards that in terms of building trust, building safety, for them to feel good and secure about working with you and buying from you, it makes a huge difference. And there's actually some business behind this too, some business rationale, is that when you have a business buyer or a consumer who's emotionally connected to your brand, they're actually 3 times more likely to buy from you, right? You want to buy from people that you like and you trust, right? So they're 3 times more likely to buy from you, but they're 8 times more likely to pay a premium. And that's actually it makes good business sense as well.
So you said, your job is to part of your job is to communicate that to your customers. Give me a few concrete examples of how this is actually done. I'd love to hear some examples from both of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the clients we work with is T-Mobile, and John Legere is the CEO, and he came actually from the telecommunications industry, and he refers to his competition as Dumb and Dumber.
Okay.
But what they've done is they've created a very systematic way of bringing empathy to their business. So what they do is they look for where's the pain, where are customers feeling the pain around phones, around the service, around streaming, and they every sort of few months they take one of them out. They look at it and say, you know what, people hate this. People hate having when they go over their limit. They hate taxes and fees at the end. They hate when the contract gets changed. And so they actually practice it as a business model.
So they systematically kind of check the boxes.
They take them out, like one by one, they've been taking them out over a number of different years. Another client we have is Cadillac. They recently created using empathy, created a whole different model called Book. What Book is it allows people to lease multiple cars. So normally you have to lease one car and you're like, oh crap, I'm stuck with this car for 3 years. This is a business model and a system that allows you, me, anybody on this stage to say, you know what, I can trade in routinely. It's the summer, I'd like a convertible. It's the winter, I'd like an SUV. And so by actually having real empathy for the problem that people have about leasing cars, it actually created a whole new revenue stream. And so there's just a couple of different ways to do it, but when you do it seriously and you do it properly, there's actually a ton of upside.
And that's really cool on dealing with consumers. with businesses? What some concrete things you guys are doing to get rid of that fear you talked about and get rid of some friction points?
Well, there's a couple of things. If I can, I'll talk about the customer side first, and I want to touch on the employee side because I think that's important too. Is that on the customer side, what we have really tried to do is simplify our language. So in high tech and in the space that I'm in, it's very technical. And so when you look at the content, you think, like, what on earth is that? What are they talking about? And they use so many marketing speak languages, etc. So we're really trying to simplify. Simple is the new hard in terms of what you have to do. And so really making it where it's human, it's simple and engaging, right? We're getting to a point where we want to engage and almost entertain our audience as they go through the purchase journey. So we're doing a massive content transformation inside of our marketing organization. The other thing on the employee side is that we recognize it's been quite a turbulent few months, a lot of change in the country. And so one thing that we do every month is we have something called the Cisco Beat. And we do it every month. It's a full company meeting. It's an open mic, so our employees can ask whatever is top of mind, complete transparency and honesty from the leadership team in terms of how they respond to employees. And when the executive orders were signed, there was a lot of angst in the organization. Yeah. And so we chose to address that really publicly and with the company and just opened it up to everyone have their say and voice what they were thinking, how they were feeling. And it was so, so powerful in terms of just reaching out. The other thing that we did is that our HR team kind of blew themselves up. So they said, what is a day in the life of an employee? Okay, and it was really pretty sucky. And so they actually completely redesigned around the employee in the moments that mattered to them, their first day at work, their last day at work. And so we've really changed how we engage our employees to be much more empathetic.
So the idea is if you take care of your employees, they'll take better care of your customers than the company itself kind of
That's
goes.
Absolutely right.
You mentioning tech there, how has technology, especially social media and the internet, changed this relationship? Because 10 years ago, if a customer was angry, they would write a letter or just talk bad about you to their friends. But now there's everything from Facebook to Yelp reviews to all the customer now finally has a voice, and in some cases a really big voice. Now, how does that change how a company thinks, and how does that change company strategy?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good thing because I think the margin of error for poor service, poor experiences has gotten shrunk. It's gotten very small. Social media obviously is a natural way to amplify that. Yeah. We were talking, the United Airlines CEO was generous enough to be here over the last couple of days, and without the actual documentation of that film, that on the airline film, if we didn't see that, the impact would probably have been much smaller. Yeah. And so knowing that social media is a real thing is important, but it's actually, in some ways, it's a gift because you actually get to hear from people. You know where it sucks. You know where the pain points are. You know where the distress is. You know where the opportunity is. So you could look at it as a negative. You could look at it as a glass half empty. But in some ways, it's actually it's a great gift when you actually know how people feel about your products and services. And those that treat it like such, I think, are the ones that are actually succeeding. And as you think of the airline industry, all the activity over the last few weeks was because of that. And so ultimately, it all actually starts to benefit customers as people start thinking about the experience in a different way.
Yeah, the airline, the United Airline case was just obviously a perfect storm of bad press. But in smaller cases, how do you kind of, being a company, how do you balance strategy and goals versus the squeaky wheels that will come up no matter what? So,
again, I think the example that Mick just gave about United is where at a strategy level and the goals you have for your company, and by the way, we're all at risk at this, whether you're a large or a small company. If your policies or your processes or procedures overtake good common sense and employee empowerment, you're always going to have an issue, no matter how that gets out, whether it's social media or not. So I think there's some lessons there from a business standpoint. But I like to tell my daughter it takes years to build a reputation and a few seconds to destroy it. And it really is something that you have to determine as a brand, what is your risk threshold.
Yeah.
So you could have a brand that is like, I've got to be so squeaky clean and conservative, I have to control and try as much as I can to control what happens in the social media world. That's never going to happen. So you just have to decide whether or not, what you're going to respond to, how you're going to react when those stories get out, because it's often how you react and respond to them is the real test of your character.
And how do you react? I feel like the past few weeks between United and then this whole Fire Festival, which is not happening here, don't worry. Like, how do you react to, like, when these crises do happen?
Oh, they do. Just two examples that I had recently is because of programmatic media buying, I had ads that showed up in Breitbart and on O'Reilly. And so my CEO had something had something to say about that, and so you just have to. Part of digital is that you go where your customers go, and they'll all have their different either political positions or there'll be a different demographic, different interests, and so you just have to marry that with your brand safety. But in those cases, you just decide in terms of what your comm strategy is as to whether. Because quite often when you react to it, that's the story, is that you've reacted to it. I don't know, Mick, what have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think people know motivations, right? So I think if companies and brands approach these contexts and these problematic situations with high degrees of authenticity, high degrees of realness, high degrees of humility, high degrees of genuine human connection, I think people are quite forgiving, and people know the difference between when a company's faking it and when a company's not. And so if you have a culture of empathy and a culture of responsiveness, and generally people believe that to be true and expressed in the experience they have with a company and a brand, I think people actually, they don't expect perfection. And so, I think if you act like that, people are a lot more forgiving than we think.
And you mentioned, when a company's faking it, obviously Pepsi got in trouble too with that ad with one of the Jenners and trying to be hip with protests, and that blew up. That was very tone deaf, and it exploded in their face. And Pepsi always wanted to be the hip, young, cool brand. How do you be authentic as a brand, and how do you avoid something that's blatantly fake, or it comes off as kind of forced and phony?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all know what phoniness looks like, right? Like the human brain is actually built to recognize frauds and phonies. I won't talk too much about the Pepsi because I'm not part of it, but we actually did a thing for Heineken recently, which is being compared to it, and we brought together people of different opinions in actually a real context, and deliberately created these two different orientations politically on a lot of issues, and sort of filmed it. And actually, what happens is people have much more in common than the opposite. And the whole effort was around coming together over a beer. But it was very real. Its motivation was sincere. I think you can always turn back to good motives, overt commercial reasons that are very transparent. I don't think really work in this world. And so if your purpose is good, your motivation's good, and then you execute it with some degree of interestingness and realness, then I think that's generally a pretty good recipe for success in this space.
Very cool. And we have a few minutes left. I want to kind of talk about the future and where this is all going. I mean, assuming that media will continue to be more dispersed. TV less important, more social media. The customer voices will get even louder, I'm sure. Where are we headed? What's the strategy for the next few years?
So I believe that the power will go back to the consumer, the buyer, the audience in terms of what data that they share. And there's some interesting examples where companies have actually been very transparent back with that buyer about, this is what I know about you, is that right? And so they have a chance to say, you know, don't market to me because you're being pulling my cookies and you know, you've got all the marketing technology to know about me. This is what I genuinely want to know about, and this is how I actually want you to engage with me. So I think the power will go back to the consumer. I think there might be different business models in terms of what they're willing to do and how they're willing to engage in you. I could see them getting into product development and you know, providing real insight and feedback real time. So I really think the power is going to continue. I do think that we're just at the start of marketing technologies. Yeah. So I think there'll be a very heavy AI component that's going to be in there. And I think for us, we're really thinking about a different way to approach talent, which is much more on, not so much crowdsourcing, but really sort of reaching out into a global community of marketing and communications professionals. And they might be going back to job slicing, time slicing. We might put a brief out into the marketplace for our next campaign and what's the best ideas that we can garner around the world versus taking a more traditional agency approach. So there's things that we're going to be thinking about how we're doing things differently that's going to be more engaging and emotionally connected to our customers.
Very cool. Mick, what do you see, what do you predict for your clients and you guys?
Well, I think to the theme of the talk, I think empathy as a muscle will become much more prevalent in winning organizations. And I think the best organizations will use it to reinvent and reimagine the experience. Mm-hmm. So obviously, technology allows us to create these wonderful experiences, and those that are quite systematic about looking at the experience, whether it's in call centers, whether it's in communication, whether it's in the product itself, those that actually, I think, employ empathy with you know, a strong degree of realness, I think will the ones that will be most successful moving forward. I also think things like VR, when you think about empathy and you think about things like VR, yeah, the immersive ability to place yourself in someone else's shoes in other countries, I think that will become it's almost like a fast route to empathy.
The whole viewpoint, yeah.
Change the whole vantage point of something. And so I think you'll start seeing people using it. They're obviously using it in education. They're using it in health. But you know, it's I think you'll see that being a dominant way that empathy gets used.
Awesome. We're out of time. That was a great place to end.
Wow.
That was a very fast 20 minutes. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your attention. All right.